right, guys, let's get started here. It's 6:01 Pacific time, and want to welcome everybody for joining, and people are still starting to shuffle in. But this is Best Practices in Operating a Japan Business. I'm your host, Jordan Bronstein, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today with our expert panel who's going to talk about the subject. Before we get into the content, just wanted to talk about why we're doing this and what the Social Dignity Webcast really means. So obviously now we're 6 months into pandemic, and the folks at HCCR, I mean, we really believe that your network is your net worth. Basically we're building a community of like-minded professionals who are, number one, here to share collective wisdom, and that will guide us through these times. And number two, help multinational companies that are looking to grow and operate their business effectively. So the four topics that we're going to talk about for this discussion involve compliance, regulatory, product localization, and organizational design and strategy. So all really relevant. And then the backdrop is that, it's really meant to be entertaining, number one, and also to just do good and give back. So we'll talk about the rules a little bit, but wanted to meet the experts. Again, really fortunate to have everybody here. So we'll sort of start in reverse order from the content. Eugene Sabori is co-founder of GeoFusion, and his firm helps startups expand into Japan, not only to survive, but thrive. He's an operator with a lot of experience, big veteran from Adobe Systems, where he was country manager, and Microsoft, where he was a CMO. Now what he's doing is working with companies, applying his expertise across four pillars: product technology, go-to-market, legal, regulatory, people, and operations. Eugene currently resides in Seattle and spends a lot of time in Japan under normal circumstances. So thank you so much, Eugene, for joining. Also, I should note that Eugene is our champion. So he won last round, episode 1. So it's good to have him back and defend his title. Carl Hoffman is co-founder of Basis Technology. And Carl is really an entrepreneur and just the quintessential tech guy. I remember I sat in your office, Carl, 3 years ago and felt like I was having a meeting with Bill Gates. Carl has a lot of experience in text analytics, cyber forensics. He's worked with startup companies entering Japan, such as Diffio, LucidWorks, Luminoso. Also want to give a shout out to Tamer, if they're on the call. And he's enabled some heavy hitters as well, and had a ringside seat with Amazon and Google, doing their product launches, as well as Bing and Yahoo. Also does nonprofit work for Unicode Consortium, Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, to name a few. And he's an MIT alum, so has a great network there. We're very fortunate to have you on the show, Carl. Thank you so much for joining, and I think you're going to provide a lot of value to the people who are attending. And next, Ms. Aiko Shimizu is the Senior Vice President of Global Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at EVA. They provide drone charging stations, founded by a former Tesla executive. Shimizu-san has a lot of worldly experience working for firms across the globe, like Daimler and Bloomberg and the UN. She's got great credentials from UPenn Law, Columbia, and so on. So I really feel like Aiko is going to be covering regulatory and norms in Japan. So I think that's a big topic that a lot of folks in the audience mentioned were an area of interest. So thank you for joining, Aiko. And then last but not least, Scott Smoller, CEO of WeConnect. WeConnect is a leading provider of accounting, tax, and payroll services, helping companies enter Asia. He's a Lean Six Black Belt, which, from my understanding, is very hard to attain, helping companies with their process design and management. He's helped companies streamline their back office, applying his process improvement techniques and leveraging the latest technologies. He's a Japan veteran, been there for over 10 years, and helped more than 900 multinational companies with their tax and payroll services. Thank you for joining, Scott. So very quickly going to cover the ground rules here, just to make sure that everyone in the audience is clear, it's a little bit of a unique format. So it's going to follow very typical to what you'd see in Jeopardy, but with a little bit of a twist. Each panelist has a domain expertise. So Carl is going to be covering product localization. Scott is going to cover compliance. Aiko is going to cover regulatory norms, and Eugene is going to cover organizational design. Each answer is pre-canned, but there's a 60-second time limit, roughly. The final round, we're going to cover Q&A from the audience. So please start plugging away your questions in the Q&A box now, and we'll answer them at the end of the fourth round. At the end of each round, we're going to distribute polls to the audience and vote on different attributes from the audience, which, you know, the panelists have not been prompted, so they're coming with their A game on what the questions might be. And then finally, we're going to give $1,000 to the trivia champion to donate to the COVID-19 Foundation of Choice. Last time, Eugene donated to the Fred Hutchinson Research Center. So, you know, really good cause, and look forward to, you know, the winner. And let's get started. Let's get right into it. All right, guys, here we go. So here are the categories. I put these together. It's just different in Japan, which you hear a lot in the back office if you have lived in Japan and worked in Japan. From the Marunouchi to the wall, that being Wall Street, Aiko, who's based in New York. Somewhere over the ramen bowl, which I figured you see a lot of engineers in izakayas over a ramen bowl. Carl's going to cover that one. And then finally, Finding Nemoashi, which is a play on Finding Nemo, which is going to be covered by Eugene. Let me know what you guys think of the category names for next time. Let's get started here. It's just different in Japan for 100. Back office solutions are essential in any market, and Japan is no different. Scott, what kind of back office structure do you typically see companies operating with, and how does it change over time as companies grow?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jordan. So for subsidiaries in Japan with, let's say, less than 50 headcount, which is quite common, a lot of them, their accounting departments have just one staff. And we find that this is a real problem because usually that accountant, they're getting paid like 4 to 5 million yen a year, maybe up to 7 million yen a year. But you need them to be a superman or superwoman, you know, handling all the day-to-day accounting, making sure the tax compliance is done well, working with headquarter finance, making sure the processes are smooth and transparent, implementing technology, supporting the sales staff. And the reality is that these staff just don't have what it takes. So they get overwhelmed, they get stressed, they get burnt out, and they leave at some point, taking all the knowledge with them. And so for us, you know, our strong belief is when you are still a small subsidiary, let's say less than 50 headcount, you know, generally to outsource the core accounting and reporting work to get that team of experts and continuity that an accounting firm provides. And then as you grow to hire more senior finance talent who are more focused on doing things like financial planning and working closely with the business side to support them for the growth of the business.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. Thank you for starting us off with a great answer. Next up, Shimizu-san, as travel restrictions and supply chain risks grow due to COVID-19, are supply chains moving elsewhere, such as a shift to more domestic production?
Thanks, Jordan. So if we look at COVID-19, I think it's not really anything unique in the sense that I think when Japan actually experienced other disasters, such as the 2008 financial crisis during the Lehman Brothers collapse or the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, there were all these similar events that forced Japan to move its supply chains elsewhere. And I think the main event that actually triggered this was actually when Japan had the Senkaku Diaoyu Island territorial dispute. Because during that crisis, the Chinese government restricted export of rare earth material to Japan. And this was about 10 years ago. And so this led the Japanese government to offer 200 billion yen in subsidies for Japanese firms in order to diversify their production bases from China, either for domestic production or also outside of China, such as in Southeast Asia. So in this sense, I think Japan was kind of prepared, both Japanese government and the Japanese government. So in that sense, I think COVID-19 certainly has accelerated this trend, but it's really hard to tell what kind of impact it really will have. But that said, I think Japanese companies are still sort of dependent on China. So in that sense, I think, critical supplies such as auto part production, the Japanese government is really encouraging Japanese companies to bring back production to Japan.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really appreciate the historical context there, Aiko. Up next, Carl, what are some causes and solutions to product localization challenges in Japan?
Well, I'm going to preface my written answer with a thought that localizing a product for Japan impacts many parts of an organization. And one of the biggest challenges is figuring out which part of the organization should lead that effort. When I first got started in localization, more than 25 years ago, it would often be led by the documentation department. They were the ones who were translating documentation into different languages, and they'd be told, give me a Japanese product. Does product management lead? Does your international sales team lead? Does marketing lead? Localizing a product for Japan is inherently cross-organizational. And if it's the first time, an organization that's entering Japan for the first time, it can be pretty challenging and pretty intimidating. And that's why I wrote that many Western companies look at Japan and take a different approach than they would for, say, the Americas or Europe. They want to reduce risk, they don't have confidence in their team, and they lack a global strategy. But if you look at those technology firms and those products that have done really well in Japan, they've had a solid global strategy to start with. They've built a strong cross-cultural, cross-geographic, cross-lingual team. That enables them to tackle the unique issues you encounter in Japan. So, have faith and confidence in your team. Bring the best people together you can, and you will do well.
Appreciate it, Carl. All right, heading over to Eugene for the end of round one. Should multinational companies mimic a traditional top-down organizational structure or build from bottom up?
Thanks, Jordan. So the answer is it depends. I think there are a lot of considerations that you have to factor in. So let me, riff on that for a little bit so that people who are faced with this can make the best decision. I'll say that every one of my clients asks me this question. So I think it's very relevant, and hopefully it's relevant for the audience. The two prevailing organizational sort of structures are one that is locally consolidated, where all the functions report into Japan, or one that's heavily matrixed. So every function reports, aligned to headquarters or regional headquarters. The only exception to that I've found is in the last decade or so, finance, legal, and HR almost always report into the core, functions straight into HQ, mostly for compliance reasons, especially American companies. So one of the things that as a backdrop that people want to consider is that Japan is a very cohesive and consensus-driven culture. So generally speaking, I think people are more comfortable with a locally consolidated structure. And what I've seen with matrix structures is if people report into different functions, you end up with 1,000 companies of 5 within your company. Yes, people are affiliated to each other, but it doesn't feel like a singular organization unless you have a very strong leader up top who really makes an effort to establish what I call dotted line reporting relationships. Another thing you'll want to consider is obviously, English language capability. If you're an MNC, you'll always want to hire somebody who has some English language competence, especially written and reading and writing. But oral skills are much harder to find. So oftentimes you'll find yourself, gosh, do I find someone or do I hire somebody who's got the functional expertise or the language expertise? And believe me, do not go the language route. Always, always, always hire and optimize for functional skills. So how do you make the decision? It really depends on, what I think your go-to-market strategy is. If you have a globally, I think, accepted go-to-market strategy that you think will work in Japan, then a functional reporting line may work. And the good thing about that is each of the stakeholders at corporate will buy in, lean in, and help lift Japan from sort of startup mode into, sort of full speed up and running. But if you need a really unique model that requires a lot of nuance and creativity locally, then you might want to do more of a command and control, one that's locally managed. So I think that, to me, is the biggest consideration. But be cognizant of the cultural aspect. Be cognizant of obviously the English language skills, which is a premium in Japan, and of course your go-to-market model.
All right, thank you, Eugene. So that is it for round one in the books. So let's launch our poll. Which panelist has the best background? Go ahead and vote. All right, let's give it a couple more seconds. Still see some votes coming in. All right, I think that's it. So let's see what the results are. Eugene got the best background. All right. I'm going to share the results. Congratulations, Eugene. Okay, so Eugene's starting off hot with 100 points. I think he's carrying his momentum from last episode into this one. So let me award you your 100 points, sir. All right, let's dive into round two now. Back to you, Scott. So, Scott, in the new normal, work from home has become a hot topic. How is the work from home trend impacting how businesses run their back office in Japan?
Yeah, so I would say what feels like years ago back in March, people were really scared to come to the office. And for back office, the reality is companies knew there were certain tasks that had to be done at the office and some tasks that could be done remotely, but they didn't really know exactly what those were. So it definitely made companies take stock of their processes and really think about whether that task had to be done at the office or could be done remotely. So for example, all of those sales contracts that we sign by paper, well, let's use a digital signature application, which is not that difficult to implement. On the other hand, things like making payments at the bank counter, well, are you really comfortable to have your accountant take the bank seal home with them? And are they even comfortable? Probably not. So I think while back office staff may have worked from home for at least part of the time, some may have liked it, but I think many may have also found it to be pretty annoying. I think now that we're back here in October, I imagine most back office staff are actually back in the office, maybe almost full time. And whether work from home will continue will depend on the company and the individual and how they feel about working from home. But I think ultimately the outcome from this whole experience has been that companies had to take inventory of their processes, that a precedent was set for remote working, and that there was at least the start of digitalization, which I think will continue forward into the future.
Yeah, looking forward to that for sure. Thank you, Scott. Ms. Shimizu-san, what are some ways in which the Japanese government or Japanese companies are advancing diversity and inclusion initiatives? And do you see these initiatives making a significant impact on social or business culture?
Yeah, so Japan has certainly lagged, especially when it comes to female leadership roles. But I do see that there are some government and corporate D&I initiatives that have come out in recent years. And I think the most well-known government initiative was Prime Minister Abe's Womenomics, which was basically to boost economic growth through several reforms and policies in order to encourage participation of women in the Japanese workforce. But I would say that this hasn't been too successful. So for example, one of his goals was to achieve a 30% target of women in leadership roles in Japan by this year, actually, 2020. But the government has had to delay this target. And if you look at the new cabinet that was just appointed by the new Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga, he only has 2 female ministers. So I don't think that's a very positive start. But I think it's also important to note that a lot of these issues regarding female leadership and diversity and inclusion, they can't really be solved by government initiatives alone. I think you need more of the social and cultural reforms. So in regards to that, it shouldn't just be about ones that are affecting women. It should be about how work is done in general. So for example, Scott touched on this a little bit, but I think the Japanese private sector has to do something about giving people more flexibility in terms of doing work from home, and also providing sufficient daycare so that both parents can participate in the workforce. And at the same time, I do see some reasons to be optimistic when I look at some of the recent changes in the labor market as well as in people's mindsets. So there's a group called the 30% Club Japan. It's a organization that works to promote greater female leadership within companies. And their goal is to get a proportion of female board leaders in Japanese companies up to 30% by 2030. And they recently released the results of their recent study. And they found that more than around, if you look at half of the 100 Japanese companies with the highest market capitalization on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, they now have at least 2 women on their board. And this has sort of helped bring the percentage of female board members at Japanese companies to be around 13%, which is still low compared to US companies where it's about 28%. But it was still a little bit of an increase from the previous year. And I think there are some factors that are driving this growth. And one is the 2018 revision of the Corporate Governance Code. And it actually says that companies need to promote diversity, including having females in leadership roles. And I think more investors are really paying attention to this because they actually refuse to approve boards that don't have any women.
Great. Really appreciate that, Aiko. And I also have to just make one comment that my wife, Kim-san, would really appreciate, that women in leadership is not just a women's issue, it's everyone's issue. So men have to get involved as well. All right, over to you, Carl. How do companies safeguard digital assets and keep sensitive information protected while localizing a product in Japan?
Well, I want to start by saying that there's 2 ways to think about protecting information. There is the information security aspect, and then there's the intellectual property aspect. And I know somewhat more about the former than the latter. From an information security aspect, it's really no different in Japan than anywhere else because the technology is basically the same around the world. And in fact, localizing a product in Japan doesn't really make that much sense. You're really localizing for Japan, and a big technology localization effort will frequently involve contributors in every time zone, in addition to those people in country. But from a information security perspective, it's basically the same. From an intellectual property perspective, there are differences. I guess some differences of in terms of copyright law and patent law. But I think again, if you're mainly localizing rather than globalizing, you're not going to get that deep into the core algorithms or the core intellectual property of your product, and really you're going to be focusing more on how your product is tailored to the needs of the the different market sectors that you're targeting in Japan. One point I wanted to make about information security, though, is especially in a work from home environment, Japan does lag, very seriously lags behind the rest of the world in terms of internet security, especially the home internet service providers, the protections that they offer, and the capabilities of the routers that get installed in homes are very weak, and there's have many more vulnerabilities than you'd see, in the Americas or Europe or other parts of the world.
Great. Thanks so much, Carl. Okay, over to you, Eugene. What is the optimal organizational structure to align internal resources and stakeholders with the customer's demand?
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm going to focus my answer on if you're a B2B company. I think for B2C companies, which I didn't really see any on the list, obviously you'd want to align to your customer demographic. But for B2B, I think the most effective way is to think about what industries you're going to target. So if you have practices around the world, I would look at what those are and see which ones are applicable or what the opportunities are in Japan. There are some caveats, though, because if you look at certain industries like pharma or banking, they're really heavily regulated. So not only do you have to basically clear those hurdles, you really want to be able to hire the right people who have a strong background in that. And the other one that I'll mention too is public sector. So if you're selling to the government, that also requires a very, very specific set of skills. So the talent pool is very small and specialized for that. And I've also found that you almost always have to work with a Japanese partner to deliver a product or service. But there are industries that are much more, much easier to break into. Travel and hospitality, I think manufacturing, retail. These are ones that I've had a lot more success very quickly. So, sort of prioritize and pick the verticals that you're strong at globally that you think are, relatively short time to market. And then based on that, I think it becomes a lot clearer in terms of the talent that you need to hire, but also the shape of your organization. The other unique attribute of Japan is that typically the expectations from customers are some of the highest in the world. So from delivery to implementation, if your product is technical, to even sort of post-sales support, you really want to surround your customers so that they're set up for success. I think we all saw the issues surrounding Tokyo Stock Exchange over the last couple of days, and the amount of I guess care and sort of resources that now the vendors are having to surround that with is exorbitant. But again, those are the kind of situations where you really need to be hands on deck and have the resources allocated to make the customers right. So I think that's what I would do if I were thinking about how to align with customers in Japan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eugene. All right, that does it for round two. So we're halfway through the pre-canned question. So let's launch the poll here. The question is, which panelist answer that they gave in round two is most relevant to your business operations? So launching the poll. Going to give it 5 more seconds. Some of you are undecided. All right, I'm going to end it and share the results. And Ms. Shimizu-san, Aiko, congratulations, you won round 2. All right. So let's go on to round 3, guys. Back to you, Scott. Scott, traditionally the back office in Japan is extremely paper heavy, but lately there's more discussion about implementing paperless processes and even digital seals. What are the top things to keep in mind to ensure that a business maintains a sleek, cost-effective back office?
Yeah, so I would say from my experience that Japan is about like 10 years behind, let's say, the US in the development and adoption of cloud solutions. And the good news is, though, that let's say in the past 2 years, there are a lot more cloud applications coming to market to support back office activities that a lot of companies probably don't know about yet. And so what I thought would be helpful is actually, I'm just going to tell everyone from our experience what some good applications are that they may want to look into. So the first one is for accounting. If you want an English cloud accounting solution where you can give unlimited staff visibility to the books, bills, and invoices of your company, check out Xero, Xero. For payroll, if you want to go paperless with pay slips and year-end adjustment and my number and all that social and labor insurance processes, check out the application Smart HR, and it's actually free for up to 30 staff. For banking, a lot of people don't like the SMBC and Mizuho online banking interfaces. They're really kind of clunky and nasty. So if you want easy access from your phone to check your bank balances, and transaction activity for your bank accounts, check out the application MoneyTree. And then for expense reimbursements, if you want a bilingual application where your staff can take pictures of receipts and it has digital workflow for approvals and it really streamlines the expense reimbursement process, check out the application Staple. But so those are 4 really great applications, but being aware is really just half the battle. And the other half is convincing your back office staff to actually implement and adopt these new tools, which can be very challenging in Japan, where staff are often resistant to change.
Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate that you opened the kimono there to some actual tools. And also you mentioned MoneyTree, so I want to give a shout out to Jonathan Epstein, friend of the webcast.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Aiko, the Japanese government is known to be especially slow in its decision-making. What are some ways in which companies can speed up the decision-making process in order to stay competitive?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that you really need to come prepared. And I know that sounds really obvious, but what I mean by this is that I think one of the main differences between policy making in Japan and the US, well, it's not just Japan. It's basically, I think there's something unique about the policy world in the US, and it's this abundance of policy think tanks that can be driven by like specific issues, or it could also be, sort of bipartisan. And in other countries such as Japan, they don't really have this. But what that means is that the Japanese government officials have a lot of data and information, because that's how they do their research in order to gather information to make the best policy decisions. So that means that when companies meet with regulators, they really need to bring in, they also need to be well informed and to bring the right data and the information in order to back up your case. And I think one of the types of data that's relevant would be to take information on like regulations and data on what is working well in other countries, especially in like the US or the European Union. Another thing is that it would be important to sort of demonstrate like a common goal between what you're trying to accomplish as a business in Japan, as well as the goals of like the Japanese government. So for example, one of the things that Japan is concerned about is things like meeting like the emission targets for like the Paris Agreement, or in order to sort of contribute to like social issues such as like the aging society. And just to give you an example, when I was working on international external affairs at Daimler, one of the things that we were trying to do was to pilot test platooning, which is basically self-driving trucks on public highways in Japan. And usually the Japanese government doesn't really like to just, sort of like push like aggressive like testing, especially on like public highways, because it impacts like, regular drivers. But when Daimler and other truck manufacturers, when we came together to sort of demonstrate that platooning could actually contribute to this aging society problem, because there's there aren't that many like young people that actually want to become truck drivers, then the Japanese government quickly agreed and actually provided guidelines in order to allow us to conduct public testing of platooning. And I think if you contrast this to how quickly these changes are happening in other places like Europe, our office in Europe or like other European car manufacturers, they won't be allowed to test on public highways in Europe until next year.
Great. Thank you so much, Aiko. Pulling the right levers. Back to you, Carl. How should multinationals test new products in the Japanese market, and what are some strategies to validate product market fit?
Well, fundamentally, testing a product in Japan is the same as in any other part of the world. It's about listening to your customer, rewarding early adopters, and uncovering problems as early as you can before you spend too much money. Japan is different in that there is generally a much higher expectation for a very high quality customer service, very responsive customer service, and you'll see that from both large and small customers. There is less tolerance for flaws that a Western company might view as cosmetic. I should say something about technology. For enterprise software companies that are launching a product that deals fundamentally with business data, documents, numbers, reports, the shape of that data can be very different in Japan than it is in the United States, especially with regard to written language. So software that was designed to search or analyze English language text or text in Western languages is going to need a lot of reworking when it goes into Japan or other parts of Asia. I think that companies that hedge their risks too much do miss out on big opportunities. I gave a couple of examples here, not technology companies, but Starbucks is an example of a company that I think was too risk averse and essentially franchised in Japan, fearful about what might happen. But as it turned out, Starbucks Japan was wildly successful. Costco, on the other hand, was under a lot of pressure to find a big partner. But the guy who led that effort said, you know what, I'm going to go into Japan and it is somewhat different, but I'm going to just pursue the same strategy that I would in any other part of the world. And Costco Japan became very successful, wholly owned by their parent.
Great, thank you, Carl. Yeah, and I think that ties together some of the stuff you were talking about earlier about being confident and being all in.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so this is the last question of round 3. Eugene, how can regional leaders influence global headquarters to understand and be deferential to the nuances in the Japan market?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So I think there's both an objective piece and a subjective piece. The objective piece is the piece that, I think we spend a lot more time on, which is around conveying market opportunity, how many dollars there are to be captured there. If you're a marketer, you probably use more, technical terms like, total addressable market, things like that. But I'm going to assume that everybody does that really well. So I think the second piece, the subjective piece, is what I've written here, which is, you really want to be proactive in your communications with headquarters. If you have a Japanese leader and obviously kind of a top-down model that we covered earlier, Japan tends to self-isolate and doesn't communicate as frequently as some of the other geos would. And I've sat on both the Japanese side as well as the headquarters side, so I've seen this time and time again. So encouraging, I guess, the subsidiary to really proactively communicate, I think, is really important. But the second thing that I found that was really effective is it says invite key executives on the third line here. I would tell my team, implicate key executives from corporate, meaning have them come every quarter if their schedules allow, and really get them involved in the sort of the building of the Japanese business, and have them start building personal relationships with customers and partners, and also, just get them immersed in the Japanese culture. And, having them do that not only allows them to obviously, understand and learn the Japanese nuances, they become vested. And I found that that's been the most effective way to get corporate to be bought into, the nuances of the Japan market. And what that means typically is that you get the investments that you need to be successful there. So that's been my technique over the years. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Eugene. And hopefully when things open back up, you can continue advising companies on what techniques and what motions they can.
Yeah. So just on that real quick, one of my customers is actually Snowflake, a company that just recently went public. And obviously they just launched in Japan a year ago. And the US executives are actually doing Zoom calls with Japanese customers quite frequently. So it can be done over Zoom too. Thanks.
All right, guys, so that's the end of round 3. Before I go into the poll, just wanted to remind everybody to ask questions for the 5th round. We have one question right now that we're sitting on, so appreciate. We want to get at least 4 questions in. I think we have enough time. So back to the round 3 poll. Sorry, let me go to the round 3 poll. So right in round 3, which panelist answer is the most actionable to your business? And I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds. And we need one more vote right now. We have a tie. I don't think this has ever happened. All right. We have a tie. So
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot now.
paper, scissors, indeed. You know what? I'm just going to give you guys both the points. So Scott and Eugene both get 300 points there. If it had to be the round of 300, right? I don't have a tool to divide that up. All right, so let's dive into round 4, guys. What are the vital points to be aware of when building your back office function to ensure the business gets its return on investment for its finance department and HR functions in Japan?
Yeah, so we hear all the time business executives complain, I spend all this money on my accounting department and I don't know what I'm paying for. And the reality is, especially in Japan, accountants are typically strongest at making sure that you get all your tax filings done on time. And they're kind of okay at the monthly accounting and reporting, usually not so strong with process and technology, and then really bad at supporting business executives to help them get the information that they need to support the growth of the business. So when you hire staff or even engage outside support, obviously you want to make sure that every yen is adding value and getting a return on that. And so it's really important to take stock of all of your business requirements from the business side and really make sure that you get the right people in for the right job and the right people on the right job. And I would say 2 things about that. One is a lot of this comes down to having better job descriptions that clearly state what you're looking for in an accountant, and being able to better manage the candidates' expectations about what the role really entails. And I think that a U.S. firm that is hiring an accountant in Japan, they may assume that an accountant in Japan will be similar to an accountant in the U.S. And so they'll focus maybe more on the Japan compliance point, which they see as the piece that's different from what a typical accountant would typically have. So that's what they maybe often focus too much on in the job description versus more of the expectations and requirements around business side support. And the second thing is that I think it's important for firms to look at engaging outside support, whether it's a consultants or accounting firms, to get fractional support in areas that can add value that your in-house team cannot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. Okay, over to Aiko. Aiko, government actors are known to protect domestic business interests, and Japan is no different. What are some strategic ways for foreign companies to engage with the Japanese government?
Thank you. Yeah, I think to some extent, government should be, willing to sort of protect their own businesses. I think that's just natural. Now that said, I think when you're engaging the Japanese government, I think it's really important that rather than going in to disrupt the market, you're actually taking this approach to work collaboratively with the government in order to launch your new product. And to make sure that you're doing this from early on, because I think trust building early on is really important in not just with the Japanese government, but in business culture in Japan in general. And I think once you have that trust, it'll be so much easier for you to do business. And just to give you an example, I had an opportunity to provide sort of like external advice to one of the major US tech firms that have been trying to break into the Japanese market. And I can't disclose the name, but I can guarantee you that it's a company that all of you have probably used, especially in the US. So while they had been in Japan for a few years now, they were really struggling because they were being heavily targeted by the Japanese government because of the mistake that they had made early on, which was to try to enter the Japanese market in order to sort of disrupt the market, which worked in places like California, but it didn't work so well in countries like Japan or some of the EU countries. So then when I had to work with them to find solutions on how to fix this, it became very clear that they had sort of wasted their opportunity during the first few years that they first came into Japan. And by then it was kind of difficult to sort of start over and build that trust all over again. And I think once you actually build trust with the Japanese government, I think, the Japanese government is aware that regulation is certainly important in order to ensure safety, but at the same time, over-regulation also sort of hurts innovation. And I think they understand that. So once you have that trust, they will do everything they can to really sort of help you balance regulation and like over-regulation.
Great. Thank you so much, Aiko. A lot of really good points there. And I think if anybody wants to discuss that later, it's really, I think you nailed it there. Back over to Carl. Carl, several major Japanese companies such as Fujitsu have already announced divestitures of roughly 65% of real estate assets. How is commercial office space in Japan changing, and what impact does it have on product collaboration?
Well, my firsthand experience with regard to commercial office space really pertains to startups. So, small commercial leases. I can't really say anything about, the larger companies. But what I've seen for small users of small commercial spaces is that there has been more flexibility from landlords in the US in terms of restructuring leases and providing relief during the during this pandemic. I think you're going to see companies of all sizes relying more heavily on flexible workspace options, co-working, and so on. And I should just make a shout out to CIC, which is the largest and oldest of the innovation centers in the New England area, is launching CIC Tokyo, I think in 2 months, in November. And so they're going to have some very nice spaces for startups. But another side effect of the the pandemic disruption with regard to office space has been accelerating the migration of infrastructure into the cloud to make it easier for people to be not tied to a specific physical office, or not necessarily behind the the on-prem corporate firewall. I think those companies that are agile and better better at adapting are going to do better at surviving.
Indeed, have to be agile. All right, and so this is the last question before we go into the Q&A. Eugene, if a company decides to establish multiple entities in parallel across APAC, so Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia, in this use case, what's the best way to structure that organization?
Yeah, I think the sort of the tension point is, do I establish a regional APAC headquarter that's either based in Sydney or Hong Kong, Singapore, sometimes Tokyo, or do I have Japan outside of APAC and report directly into headquarters? And and do I boot it up independently? I do have an opinion on this. I think that Japan is what I call a market of one. I think China is a market of one. India is a market of one. There's just very little in common with the greater Asia Pacific region. So I do think that Japan should report directly into APAC. It's also an expensive investment oftentimes that companies are making. I found that typically startups or an MNC, if they don't have a presence in Japan, are starting up a subsidiary. They're investing at least $5 million to get a business going. So it's not a trivial amount of money for many businesses, and you want to make sure that you set it up for success. And the way you help a Japanese subsidiary become successful is if all functions are operating really, really well. So regardless of the organizational structure that we talked about, sales, marketing, services, support, if there's a product component, engineering, HR, finance, you want all of those functions from corporate to lean in and really help lift Japan up. And that's really hard to do if you're doing it through Sydney or Hong Kong or some other regional resource. The only exception that I've seen is if you do headquarter in Japan, so the APAC headquarters is based in Japan, or maybe you have a Japanese leader that's running APAC and really understands the Japanese sort of business, sort of requirements. And sometimes there are very experienced, executives, non-Japanese executives who are very qualified to do that. But I found that that's really the exception, not the norm. So.
Okay, great. All right, guys. Well, that was a lot of fun. That wraps up our 16 questions in under an hour. So, yeah, a lot of good insights there, a lot of good wisdom. So, thank you guys so much. So, let's head over to our first Q&A from the audience. So, I'll just read this one out loud. Although Japan has put incentives in place for companies to leave China, the cost of products produced in Japan will hardly match the price from China, mainly because of manpower. In this sense, which would be the most probable country to partner Japan in this business, and how long will this transition take? So I'll let Aiko handle that one, because that was in line with one of her questions. And then if anybody else wants to open up the floor, feel free. But Aiko, you can have the first crack.
Thank you. So I think what the Japanese government is trying to do is to not just shift like all production to domestically, but actually to just more like diversify. So I think in terms of like supply chains, we see more going to countries in Southeast Asia. So for example, like Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, these are like some of the markets that we're seeing a shift towards. And I think China is actually becoming sort of expensive compared to these countries. So it does make sense depending on like the industry. I think companies that are sort of taking advantage of this are mostly in like auto and aviation. So I think it does depend on the industry.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts? All right, cool. So I actually, I missed one of the polls, so I'm gonna send out the round 4 poll. So let me go back to that. Ooh. All right, so far, audience, if you guys are still tuning in, which panelist feels the most engaging tonight? Let's give it about 10 more seconds. Reminder, there is a prize on the line here, guys, so there's a lot of skin in the game. Everybody who's still here needs to vote. All right, give it 5 more seconds. And the winner is Aiko. I'll post the results there. So Aiko, that round was for 400 points. So you're in the lead now with 600. And we're going to go to the next Q&A question. So this message is from actually HCCR's head of commercial, Casey Abel. Do you guys have any tips to help local executives or staff in managing overseas bosses' expectations in terms of speed of business in Japan? Okay, so I'm going to throw that one over to Carl, because I think you had touched on that a little bit in your answers.
I was afraid you were going to do that. Gosh, that's been the bane of my existence. I used to feel that the best way of acclimating, or adjusting expectations was to bring people to Japan. There's nothing like, spending a week in Tokyo, and especially if it's the first time for a business leader, meeting a few people, and talking with prospective partners. Case studies, for somebody like Eugene, who's, been through this over and over again, you've probably got a lot of data on hand where you could talk about for a product in a particular space, a company of a particular size, this is what the investment was, and this is how long it took. Certainly the transactional aspects of doing business also take longer. NDAs, evaluation agreements, pilots, proofs of concept, customer acceptance testing, and so on. But the reward at the end is if you get through that obstacle course, you can earn very strong customer loyalty. The business relationships tend to be very sticky. If you do a good job, you will have loyal customers for a long time.
Fantastic. Thank you for that thoughtful answer, Carl. Does anybody else want to chime in on?
Yeah, if I can just make a comment, I would say that the best tip is to cross your fingers and hope that your boss has at least one rodeo in Japan and understands what it's like. Because honestly, from my experience, I find that if you have a boss or you have executives that have no experience in Japan, you could be the most credible and logical person and telling them how it is, and they're just gonna go, I've done this country, I've done that country. I don't, I'm experienced, I don't believe it. So I think to Eugene's point about Japan being a country of one, a lot of people don't understand that until they go through it at least one time. And I think that it's just one of the challenges of playing with, companies setting up in Japan.
Yeah, and I'll also add, I don't think any of those types of executives who just sort of spray and pray would, take the time to, engage with such an esteemed panel. So, it's almost like, sometimes you're yelling at a wall when you have those issues. So there's another question here. Advice on selling direct versus partner and channel. And I'm going to spin that one over to Eugene, because I know we've talked about that one a lot.
Yeah, this is not a simple answer. I think it really depends on the situation. But generally speaking, without getting into specifics of the situation that this person has, it's probably both. It's just, you know, how do you prioritize one over the other, or what do you start with? In my view, although it is more expensive, I do think that it's important to start with direct, because you're going to learn a lot more. If you can afford it, and if you can invest the sort of resource to do so, I think it is important to start with direct, while in parallel, start evaluating a partner strategy. And you know, there's some benefits to doing direct other than, you know, obviously velocity. I think, you know, you learn a lot more about your products, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's an opportunity to obviously refine how you deliver it, or the product quality itself. But it also helps you hone your, you know, your go-to-market strategy better. And it will also inform your partner strategy. But if you really want to scale and go further and get, you know, obviously drive a bigger business over time, I do think that the partner aspect is, generally speaking, very, very important. You know, it's tough to give a clear-cut answer on this, but that would be my generic advice.
I might add something to that, which is to be careful of exclusive relationships. And sometimes you can have an agreement which in Western eyes say, well, this is exclusive, but there's performance requirements to retain exclusivity, and there's a limited term and so on. But what's going out in the market is that your partner is telling everybody, you know, this company is ours. And you kind of find yourself in an awkward situation later on if you really do want to end the relationship.
Yeah, indeed. That's a really good call out, Carl. And thank you, Eugene. So that's really it. We're 2 minutes over, guys. So I'm just going to launch this last poll, and then we'll have a winner. So overall, who gave the best performance, guys? And let's keep it open for another 10 seconds. Still some ticks left. There's some silent observers in the audience, but I think the poll is settled now. And the winner is Aiko, Ms. Shimizu. There it is. So Aiko is our champion of episode 2. Thank you. Congratulations, Aiko. So that's 1,100 total points. Eugene came in second with 400. But you know what? We're all winners here at the Social Dignity webcast. This was really a great panel, guys. I thank you guys so much. I think you know, all the stuff that you had pre-scripted was great, but then you guys added some additional inputs, and really just so grateful to be a part of this and you know, a fly on the wall here. So thank you guys all. Have a good night. Congratulations again to Aiko. Amazing job. And we'll see you guys next time on episode 3. I'm Jordan Braunstein, again with HCCR. We're your partners on the ground in Japan for any hiring needs that you have that are critical. And reach out to any of the other panelists here. You know, they're all open. All their information is online. And hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.